James Cordell rode into town just as the sun bled out behind the mesa, painting the sky the color of old copper. His horse's breath hung in the air like gun smoke. He wasn't looking for trouble. Hadn't been looking for it since he'd buried his brother in Kansas. But trouble had a way of finding men like him. The scream cut through the evening stillness like a blade through silk. He didn't think. Thinking was what got men killed. His spurs bit into his horse's flanks, and they thundered toward the sound, toward the old boarding house at the edge of town where lamplight flickered behind dusty windows. 3 men. Always 3, James thought grimly. 3 men dragging a young woman down the wooden steps, her dress torn at the shoulder, her dark hair wild as prairie grass in a storm. She fought like a wildcat, all desperation and fury. But they were laughing, the kind of laughter that turned James's blood to ice. That's far enough? His voice wasn't loud, didn't need to be. The Remington in his hand did the talking. The men turned. The biggest one, a brute with a scar splitting his face like a canyon, shoved the girl aside. She hit the dirt hard but scrambled back against the porch, eyes wide as a spooked mare's. "This ain't your business, stranger," Scarface growled. "It is now." What happened next lasted maybe 10 seconds but would replay in James's mind for months. The draw, the thunder of gunfire echoing off storefronts, the way the 3 men fell like marionettes with cut strings, their blood turning the snow-dusted ground to crimson mud. When the gun smoke cleared, James stood alone, the Remington still smoking in his hand. The girl stared at him from the porch. Chest heaving, one hand clutched to her torn dress. She couldn't have been more than 20, young enough to still believe the world might be kind. "You all right, miss?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. They said I owed them. For my father's debts." James holstered his weapon and approached slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. "Your father?" "Dead, 3 months back. Left me nothing but that ranch up north and a pile of IOUs. Tears cut tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I ain't got no one, no husband, no brothers, no—" "You got yourself," James said quietly. "That's more than most folks have." He helped her to her feet, felt her trembling beneath his hand. The town was watching now, faces in windows, shadows in doorways, but no one came forward. They never did. "What's your name?" "Sarah." "Sarah McKenna." "Well, Miss McKenna, those men won't trouble you again." He tipped his hat. "You should get inside. Cold like this can kill a person just as sure as a bullet." But as he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Wait, please." She stepped forward, something fierce suddenly burning in those frightened eyes. "You saved my life. I got no money to pay you, but the ranch. It's got good water, good grazing land. You could—" "I don't need payment, miss." "Then take my gratitude." She straightened her spine, lifted her chin. "And know that Sarah McKenna don't forget a kindness." James looked at her, really looked, and saw something that stirred memories of the woman he'd almost married before the war, before everything turned to ash and regret. Saw strength beneath the fear, saw survival. "You take care of yourself, Miss McKenna." He rode out that night, snow falling heavier now, covering his tracks and the bodies and the blood, like the world was trying to forget what had happened. Behind him, Dry Creek faded into white silence. He didn't look back. But he carried her face with him into the mountains, those dark eyes full of gratitude and something else he couldn't name, something that kept him warm even as the snow turned his coat to ice. Winter swallowed James Cordell whole. He rode north into territories where the map ran out, and only the wind knew the names of places. Took work where he could find it, guarding supply trains through Sioux country, hunting bounties that led him through canyons so deep the sun only touched them an hour a day. The war found him in Montana, not the war he'd fought 10 years back, with its blue and gray uniforms and its brass bands and its lies about glory. This was uglier. Cattlemen against homesteaders, old money against new blood, and James found himself on the wrong side of a range war that painted the snow red from November to March. He killed 6 men that winter. Would have been 7, but the last one was just a kid, couldn't have been more than 16, and James let him ride off with his life and nightmares that would last longer than any bullet wound. Some nights, when the wind screamed through whatever shelter he'd found, he'd think about Sarah McKenna. Wonder if she'd made it through. Wonder if those dark eyes still held that fierce gratitude, or if the world had ground it out of her the way it ground the hope out of everything eventually. He told himself he'd ride back when spring came. Check on her. Make sure she was all right. But spring brought blood feuds that turned into summer gun battles, and summer brought a bullet that carved a trench across his ribs and left him fevered for 3 weeks in a line shack in Wyoming. By the time he could ride again, autumn was painting the aspens gold. 7 months had passed since Dry Creek. 7 months of gunfire and death and the kind of cold that settled in a man's bones and never quite left. James looked at himself in a trading post mirror one October morning and barely recognized what looked back, older, harder, with eyes like winter sky. But Sarah's face still lived in his memory, warm as lamplight. He pointed his horse south. The mountains were showing their teeth now, early snow dusting the high peaks. James rode through country that grew more familiar with each mile. The red rock formations, the pines giving way to scrub, the distant mesa that marked Dry Creek like a tombstone against the horizon. By the time he saw the turnoff to the McKenna Ranch, his heart was beating harder than it had before any gunfight. He crested the ridge just as the sun dropped low, and there it was. The ranch spread out in the valley like a promise. But something was wrong. Too much smoke from the chimney, too many horses in the corral, 3 of them. James felt ice form in his gut. He rode down slowly, every sense alert. As he drew closer, he could hear voices, men's voices, rough with laughter. Through the window, he caught movement, shadows crossing lamplight. Then the door opened and she stepped out. Sarah McKenna. But not the frightened girl from 7 months ago. She stood tall now, confident, wearing a simple dress that the fading light turned golden. Her hair was pulled back, her face calm. Behind her, 3 cowboys emerged onto the porch. James's hand drifted toward his gun. The biggest one, broad-shouldered with a thick beard, put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. Possessive, familiar. Everything in James went cold and sharp as a knife's edge. "Help you, mister?" the bearded man called out. James couldn't speak, couldn't think past the roaring in his ears. He'd saved her, killed 3 men for her, carried her face through 7 months of hell, and she'd... "James?" Sarah's voice cut through the rage like sunlight through storm clouds. She stepped forward, one hand raised, her face suddenly bright with recognition and something else, something like joy. "James Cordell? Is that really you?" The 3 cowboys tensed. Hands moved toward gun belts. "Easy, boys," Sarah said quickly. "This here's the man I told you about, the one who saved my life." But James barely heard her. He was staring at those 3 men, at their hands on their guns, at the way they stood around her like they owned her. "Seems you've been busy, Miss McKenna," he said quietly. Each word tasted like betrayal. Her smile faltered. "James, I don't trouble yourself explaining." He gathered his reins, his voice flat as a funeral bell. "I can see you're well taken care of now." "Wait! You don't understand." But he was already turning his horse, the rage and hurt burning in his chest like that bullet wound that had nearly killed him in Wyoming. Behind him, Sarah's voice rose, desperate. "James, please, they're not—" He kicked his horse into a gallop, her words lost in thunder of hooves. He rode hard into the gathering dark, putting distance between himself and the ranch, between himself and the sight of her with those 3 men. Fool. He'd been a damned fool. Had built her up in his mind into something pure and grateful and waiting. But women didn't wait. Why should they? 7 months in this country was a lifetime. She'd needed protection, needed help with the ranch, and she'd found it. Found it with 3 cowboys who probably... James's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He should keep riding. Should head north or west or straight to hell. Anywhere but back to that ranch and those dark eyes that had haunted him through blood and snow and loneliness. But as the last light died behind the mountains, James reined in his horse. 7 months of killing, 7 months of cold, and the one warm thing he'd carried with him through it all was a lie. Or was it? Something in Sarah's voice when she'd called after him. Something desperate and honest that didn't match with betrayal. "You don't understand," she'd said. James sat his horse in the darkness, the wind carrying the scent of pine and snow and the distant smoke from the ranch house. Maybe he didn't understand. The question was, did he have the courage to find out? The moon was rising by the time James rode back, turning the valley silver as gunmetal. He approached slowly this time, carefully, his anger cooled to something harder and more dangerous. The ranch house glowed like a lantern in the darkness. He could hear voices inside, Sarah's clear and firm, the rumble of men responding. His hand rested on his Remington as he dismounted. Before he could knock, the door swung open. Sarah stood there, and Lord help him, even angry as he was, the sight of her hit him like a fist to the chest. She'd wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the cold, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You came back," she whispered, "to hear whatever lie you're selling." She flinched like he'd struck her. "It's not a lie, James. If you'd just listen—" "Why?" The word came out harsh. "So you can explain how you needed 3 men to keep you warm while I was freezing in Montana? How you—" "They're my brothers." The world stopped. James stared at her, his mouth still open on words that suddenly had nowhere to go. "What?" Sarah's voice cracked. "They're my brothers. Half-brothers from my father's first marriage. I didn't even know they existed until 2 months after you left." She wiped at her eyes angrily. "Father never told me. But when word spread about the trouble in Dry Creek, about how those men died, they came looking, found me trying to run this place alone and failing." One of the cowboys appeared behind her, the bearded one. Up close, James could see the resemblance, the same strong jaw, the same dark eyes. "Tom McKenna," the man said, extending his hand. "Sarah's older brother. These are my brothers, Daniel and William. We've been fixing up the place, getting the herd ready for winter." His expression was hard, but not hostile. "Sarah's told us about you, about what you did for her. We're in your debt, Mr. Cordell." James felt like he'd been shot, the impact delayed, his knees suddenly weak. "Brothers," he repeated stupidly. "Yes, you stubborn fool!" Sarah's tears were flowing freely now. Did you really think I'd—" She covered her face with her hands. The rage drained out of James like blood from a wound, leaving him hollow and ashamed. "Sarah, I waited," she said through her tears. 7 months I waited, hoping you'd come back. Watching that ridge every evening, praying I'd see you riding down. The only thing that kept me going was knowing that somewhere out there, you were alive." She looked up at him, her eyes destroyed. "And you come back and think the worst of me without even asking?" "I'm sorry." The words were dust in his mouth, inadequate and small. "I saw them, saw you, and I just thought like every other man," she finished bitterly. "Thought a woman alone couldn't possibly manage without throwing herself at the first available protection. That's not, isn't it?" She straightened, wiping her face. "Maybe you should have asked yourself what kind of woman I am, James. The kind who gives up, or the kind who fights?" Tom McKenna cleared his throat. "I'll, leave you two to talk." He stepped back inside, pulling the door mostly closed. The night wrapped around them, cold and vast. From somewhere distant came the howl of a coyote, lonely and wild. I fought, Sarah continued, her voice quieter now but no less fierce. Fought to keep this place. Fought to honor my father's memory, even though he left me nothing but debts and secrets. When my brothers showed up, I didn't see salvation. I saw help. Family I never knew I had. She pulled her shawl tighter. But every night, I thought about you. Wondered if you were safe, if you remembered me. James stepped closer, slow as sunrise. I remembered. Lord help me, Sarah. I couldn't forget if I tried. His voice roughened. I carried your face through hell, through snow and blood, and nights so cold I thought I'd die. You were the warm thing in all that darkness. Then why? Her voice broke. Why did you ride away? Because I'm a fool. Because I've seen too much ugliness in this world and forgot to look for the beauty. He reached out, hesitant, and when she didn't pull away, he touched her face, felt the warmth of her tears on his fingers. Because I'm just a man, Sarah. A broken-down gunfighter who's better at killing than living. That's not true. Isn't it? I've killed maybe a dozen men since I left here, maybe more. Lost count somewhere in Montana. He let his hand fall. You should probably ask me to leave. Instead, she caught his hand, held it tight. Those men you killed, did they deserve it? They were trying to kill me first, if that's what you're asking. Then you survived. That's not something to be ashamed of, James. That's just life out here. She drew a shaky breath. You think I'm some innocent flower you need to protect from the truth of what you are? I've seen men die, watched my father waste away from the cancer, felt those 3 men's hands on me before you stopped them. Her grip tightened. I know what you are, and I'm not afraid. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches of the cottonwood by the house. You should be, James said quietly. Why? Because you know how to use that gun? Because you've seen the elephant and lived to tell about it? She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell sage and wood smoke on her clothes. I don't want a saint, James. I want a man who'll stand when standing matters. A man who'll ride through 7 months of winter and still come back. I came back thinking the worst of you. And then you came back again. Her voice softened. That's what matters. You came back to hear the truth, even though it hurt. That takes more courage than any gunfight. James looked down at their joined hands, hers small and work-roughened, his scarred and calloused. 2 people shaped by hard country and harder choices. I don't know how to be anything but what I am, he said. Then be that. Be the man who saved me. Be the man who kept my face in his memory through the dark. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw everything he'd been afraid to hope for. Be the man who stays. I'm not good with staying. Learn. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, thrown down like a gauntlet, and James felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen since before the war, before his brother died, before he'd forgotten that life could be more than survival. Your brothers, he started, will respect any choice I make. They're good men, James. They'll see you're a good man, too, once you stop acting like a wounded bear. A hint of her old smile flickered across her face. Besides, we could use another hand. Winter's coming, and this place needs work. I'm better with a gun than a hammer. Then you'll learn that, too. The door creaked open, and Tom McKenna stuck his head out. Everything all right out here? It's cold enough to freeze a witch's. He caught sight of their joined hands and stopped. Ah, well, there's coffee on if you're staying, Cordell. James looked at Sarah, at the hope and strength and stubborn determination in her face, looked past her to the warm light spilling from the house, to the life she'd built despite everything. "Yeah," he said, the word coming easier than he'd expected. "I'm staying." Sarah's smile broke across her face like sunrise after a long winter night, and when she rose on her toes to kiss his cheek, James felt the ice in his bones finally begin to thaw. They walked inside together, into warmth and coffee, and the sound of her brother's laughter. Outside, the wind still howled and the mountains still wore their crown of snow. But for the first time in 7 months, maybe longer, James Cordell felt something other than cold. He felt home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night. And in the window, lamplight glowed steady as a promise, visible for miles across the valley, a beacon for any lost soul looking for their way back to the warmth. Thanks for staying to the end. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let me know if this old Western tale found its way to your corner of the world. Until the next story, partner.